So first of all, we'll start by removing the dust jacket from this hardcover book. Notice how sticky the wet pages can be, so it's times like this you need to be very careful so that you're removing it gently and ensuring that you're not tearing that quite fragile paper. You lay it down and then gently roll the book open. You can see that it's been forced in the floodwaters, a bit of damage there. And then you lift it up, supporting the text block all the time, and you can also see that colour bleeding out from the cover of the book. There's always a problem in water damage, the bleeding of dyes in book covers and textiles, things like that, unavoidable, not irretrievable. And so now we'll carefully place that book jacket on another piece of paper to dry. And that can just be left there to air dry while you're working on other things. And now we'll determine what sort of air drying method we'll use for this book. And this will be based on how wet the interior is and how strong the book support is. And oh dear, we can see that the spine has separated from the text block. So it has lost a lot of its structural strength, so it will have to be air dried flat in a method that we call interleaving. And for this you'll need absorbent material such as paper towel. It can be the serrated sectioned paper towel for ease of use, or it can just be general roll paper towel which you can cut yourself, or it can be butcher's paper that you can get from newsagents and other suppliers. Anything that will absorb and help draw out the moisture from the book. So it's important that you don't interleave every page, otherwise you'll swell the spine and the book will end up much more distorted than it will, because it won't dry completely flat once it's been wet like this. You've got to be realistic. So it's also important not to push the drying material too far into the spine, otherwise that will also swell the book. So you just need to gauge it yourself, how many pages, probably every 25 to 50 pages, put another sheet of interleaving material in there. We won't go through this whole book because it could take a little while. So we'll leave it at that. So let's assume you've interleaved the whole book. You then pull the cover back over. You'd put an interleaving there probably. Pull the cover over and put that in your drying area where you're putting all your other materials while you ready them for air drying. And at some stage we will come back and change that interleaving as it draws the blotter out. It'll get damp and we'll change it and we'll show you how to do that. Another method of air drying water damaged books is by using a fan. And this is reserved for books that still maintain good structural strength and they're not too wet. So when you place them upright, the text block isn't going to pull itself out of the binding and the stitching through its wet, waterlogged state. So when you have a book that is able to be air dried, and this is a much faster method than the interleaving, you get it up on its spine. It doesn't matter whether it's the top or the lower edge, and you gently open up the pages as long as they can be easily separated and that the book cover is supporting that nicely. Then you're going to get an oscillating fan, because you'll have several of these books in this condition. So you line them all up on an absorbent material. We're using a lovely old nappy in this situation. Then we're going to turn on the fan, just a simple oscillating fan, so that the air from the fan will move across those pages. You don't want it so strong that the air will blow the pages down and distort them. You just want a nice even, regular air movement across the pages. After a while, once the book has been drying in that orientation, you can turn it up the other way so that the other edge is uppermost, and you would just keep a check of what books were in that position. So this is called another air drying technique, but using a fan, and it's reserved for books that are wet but not very wet and still have good core strength. They've done their Pilates over the years, and you can dry them that way much faster than through interleaving. So here we have our interleaved book, which is now basically dry, very nearly dry. There's still just a couple of pieces of interleaving in, but the covers are always the last part of the book to dry. So we're going to interleave those again. We now can brush out any residue dirt that is still there very gently, keeping in mind the fragility of the paper and the binding there. So any dirt that is now easily brushed off, you don't want to have to really scrub at this, but just easily brush off the dirt to get that out. And then we're going to get a bit of interleaving with paper towel to continue drying the cover. And now we're going to shape the book. So trying to encourage it back into its original shape, keeping in mind that when a book is water damaged, it is very rarely that it returns to its perfect shape that it was beforehand. But we can certainly encourage it to get back to its original shape as much as possible. So we will carefully position that there with the interleaving, because like I say, the cover is still a little damp. So we will now put the weight on, but first we'll cover and protect the cover with another bit of paper, and we're just going to use a breadboard for our weight. So you need something that's solid to provide even distribution across the book, and then we're using my mother's old weight from her scales, her cooking scales, as a weight to encourage that book to dry flat. And we'll just see if we can see a shot underneath there of how the book is nicely weighted underneath there and still on its absorbent material. So we will come back and check that. What you must keep in mind always when working with wet material is that mould can readily grow. You can easily get mould growing in less than 48 hours when you have damp material. So keep in mind, you need to be vigilant, you need to be watching all your wet materials for mould growth, and if you see that happen, you need to address it immediately. And hopefully we'll have a video on that for you shortly.